were a few years with very little overwintering monarchs. And also butterflies are pollinators. A lot of our food sources depend on pollination. So fruit and a number of vegetables have to be pollinated in order to produce a crop. And for you birding fans out there, butterflies are out in the open during the day. They're sort of easy to see and sort of easy to identify, which I could say the same thing about birds, especially if they sit still for a while. And they call butterflies a charismatic group of species. People are interested in them and they're fun to look at. So let's take a look at a couple in the next slide.
There we go.
Ava doing triple duty or something here. What's really fun about butterflies ever since I was a fairly small child, I was quite interested in the larger butterflies, and here's a few of them. On a thistle, there's the monarch, spicebush swallowtail. These are both out on Belle Isle, and strangely enough, a giant swallowtail in my backyard in Corktown and near downtown Detroit. Next slide. The method that I'm using that's sponsored by the Kalamazoo Nature Center and is also hosted by a couple of universities, one of them being Georgetown and Washington, D.C., is called a pollard base. So there's a technique. You have to take a little training and do a certain type of walk and write down what you see in a specified amount of time. And I've seen one scientific article using this volunteer citizen science, you might call it, database to illustrate a population trend. So they took 20 years of data from a number of sites in the state of Ohio, looked at it for 20 years, and people are walking the same routes, the same general time of year, and a 33% decline. This is overall butterfly numbers, and it includes quite a wide range of species. This is a decline that's also unfortunately been showing up in birds, other types of insects, and spiders and other arthropods. Next slide. So as I said, the Kalamazoo Nature Center sponsors the MichiganButterfly.org, or I'm sorry, MichiganButterflyNetwork.org. And I think there are about 80 counts going on now in the state of Michigan. I'm in my 4th year. I think I was number 70 or so when I started in 2017. So the Kalamazoo Nature Center provides training in several locations around the state, usually about once a year in the late winter, early spring. And they help people who want to volunteer and do this. It helps me that I'm retired, but you don't have to be retired. You only need to go out at least 6 times during the butterfly season, which is mostly May through September. And try to get a few walks in to get the seasonal differences. And I mentioned the Pollard standardized database, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. So you can get at the Michigan Butterfly Network there with that website. Okay, well, the training provided by the Kalamazoo Nature Center, they brought out 3 boxes of specimen butterflies. And one thing they wanted people to know before they started doing a butterfly walk and census is that you're familiar with what they call the 25 most common butterflies in Michigan. So here, we're going to try a poll, and perhaps you'd like to type into the chat room 1 to 25 of what you think are the most common butterflies in Michigan. Here's a hint. I showed you two of them already.
How many do you think we covered here, Tom? Maybe about 10
Got
or
a bunch.
10?
We have a bunch. And I see some people know some other ones too, which are Michigan butterflies. I'm not sure, but I think I saw a buckeye yesterday. That's a fast flyer, as are many of these.
Are you ready for me to show the next slide, the picture?
Yeah, let's take a look at the next slide and I'll show how I'm cheating here. Oh, there's an excellent answer there. Okay, so what I did is these are what's called true butterflies, and there's another actually bigger group called the skippers, and many of them are quite common, but they're not in this box of specimens. But let's start with these showy, colorful ones, if we would. So on the left, they're representatives of a worldwide group of large butterflies that are very colorful, and they tend to eat weird plants and have adaptations to get around toxic materials in various plants. The first one up here on the upper left is the black swallowtail that is in love with the carrot family. And actually, I think they prefer dill and parsley over wild carrot. But wild carrot is just about everywhere around here, so there's no shortage of host plants for them. You might notice that the male black swallowtail shows a lot of yellow, and both the male and the female have a double row of yellow spots on the wing margins. Below them is one of our larger butterflies, the tiger swallowtail. And some people call them yellow swallowtails because they are mostly yellow, but they have tiger-like stripes. And an interesting feature is that some of the female tiger swallowtails are actually black and look quite a bit like our next swallowtail, except you can still sort of see the tiger stripes in the lower wing. I haven't seen one of the black morphs on Belle Isle yet. The next one that I have seen on Belle Isle is the spice bush swallowtail. We have male in the lower left and the females up at the top again. And there's slightly different color on the hind wing. There's kind of a bluish green on the male and a greenish blue for art majors out there. A little bit of green, but mostly blue on the female. And you notice how similar that is to the black swallowtail. It's a little bit bigger, likes wooded habitats, although they don't stay there when they're flying around using flowers that are out in the open. But notice it has this pretty much a single set of yellow stripes. The second stripe is just on the edge of the wing. You wouldn't see that unless you had the butterfly in hand. So that's the spicebush swallowtail. I selected my route to some extent because when I go through the woods, the understory is all spicebush. And it took me 2 years to actually find a spicebush swallowtail in that area, but they're out there. Okay, another large group of butterflies are the whites and sulfurs. And going down this second column on the left, you have the male and female of a very common and garden pest butterfly called the cabbage white. And if you ever get close enough to them, you can see the male has a single black spot on the forewing, while the female has a double black spot. But they're all over our lettuce and anything in the mustard family, and broccoli, all that, the cress group. They're perfectly good hosts for their caterpillars. Another common field butterfly below that is a group that's mostly yellow, and they're called sulfurs as a group. And the so-called clouded sulfur, and kind of the center of the left, second from left column, is called clouded sulfur because of the black margin on the wing, on the inside wing. And it comes in a bright yellow, a pale yellow, and an almost white. Version, it's the same species, is very bright orange and still has that black wing margin, and the female has a more mottled appearance. It's slightly bigger, and I actually got one right between my feet this spring. Got a good look at that one. Okay, the next one group in the middle top are coppers and blues. The blues are predominantly blue, especially on the inside wings, but they're very tiny. They like to fly around and not stay around for you to look at them very much. The copper is something that will live on weedy fields. It likes the plant sorrel that is actually an edible green that tastes a little bit like lemon. I have yet to see the American copper out on Belle Isle. I'm sure they're out there. And the next one in the center here is the Great Spangled Fritillaria. This is in a large group of butterflies called the brush-footed butterflies. They have modified forelegs that look like brushes. And the larger, fancier ones are in this fritillary group. They tend to be orange and black spotted. And a very common weedy field butterfly in the center there called the pearl crescent. And if you could see the other side of the butterfly, they actually have little pearl-colored crescent-shaped things on the hind wing. The next two are called angle wings. The first one, a little bit bigger than the second one. You generally see them as, gee, I think that was an orange butterfly. They fly extremely fast. They eat rotting fruit, and if a tree has an injury and is oozing sap, it's a good place to find them. Every once in a while, they'll calm down, and you get a look at them. And they're named after punctuation. The question mark actually has an arc with a dot under it, and actually looks like a question mark, but it's on the lower wing. And the little smaller comma, it likes hop plants and nettles. And it has just a little arc shape on the outer wing. So you need a good look at them to see that outer wing when they have their wings closed. In the same group, a little bit slower flying on the top, second from the right, is the mourning cloak. And this is a butterfly that will overwinter as an adult. And it's possible to see them in March and April on a warmer day, flying around. They can be pretty common. They like willows as a host and a number of other brushy tree species. And below that, I know someone guessed these, more than one person. There's two species that are called ladies, which is second from the right and second and third from the top. When their wings are closed, there's a rose-colored area on the outer or ventral forewing. And one of them has 2 large eye spots on the lower wing, and the other has 4 large eye spots. And again, this is a butterfly that can go 40 miles an hour. Every once in a while, you get one sitting still, and you can tell which species it is. Both of these are highly migratory, and I saw a big batch of American ladies on October 1st last year at the head of Belle Isle. Next one is a real common one around neighborhoods. It seems to like privet a lot, and it'll show up on the flowers, and they're territorial. I usually have one in my driveway or sidewalk that will fly up and get after me, get up in my face. And it's a very smart little fast flying butterfly, and the only one that has that single orange bar. It's pretty prominent even on the lower wings. They happen to have a specimen here. It's upside down. Next one going down the list is in the same family, called the red-spotted purple. And it has orangey red spots also on the lower wing. But it's a nice showy butterfly. It's pretty common in wooded habitats. I've seen just a couple on Belle Isle. And finally, at the lower, almost to the last column here, the one on the bottom is a viceroy, which you may have heard about. It's very similar to the monarch. It's a mimic of the monarch, because the monarchs taste bad to almost all birds. It's very helpful for a tasty viceroy that's been living on willow leaves and a few other things. It doesn't have the glycosides that are present in most monarch plants. That's the host plants for the monarch butterfly, milkweed plants. Then finally, going up into the rightmost column, there's a group of brown butterflies that skulk about in woodlands for the most part, and they're told apart by the patterns of spots they have on their wings. And again, this is a butterfly that likes to fly around a lot. It goes on dung, rotting fruit, rotting animals, and oozing trees. So not so much on flowers at all for this group. So we have at the top the northern pearly eye, an eyed brown, a pretty common butterfly, a very small one called the little wood satyr. It has 2 prominent spots on the forewing. And then the common wood nymph, which is annoying enough to me because I've yet to see one on Belle Isle, but it is pretty common around at least southern Michigan. And this one comes with a yellow version and a gray version as far as those spots go. And then finally, the most iconic butterfly we've got going, the monarch. It's a good-sized butterfly, 3.5 inches across, and it's usually flapping about and gliding in its flight, especially when they're in migration. So it could help distinguish it by size and also the way it flaps from the very similar viceroy butterfly. So those are our top 25. Feel proud if you got a few of those, and there's a few of these I've yet to say, as I mentioned, yet to see on Belle Isle. I got most of them now in my 4th year. So Ava, next slide. As I mentioned, you can't predict where these butterflies are going to be. There's talked about picking my trail along a growth of spice bush. So the first swallowtail I saw on the spice bush is actually the tiger swallowtail, and I think it was just resting there. Next slide. I'd like to talk about the butterfly garden, again at the head of Belle Isle, just outside of the building for the Belle Isle Nature Center. And next slide, please. To establish the butterfly garden, they just stopped mowing the lawn, and they did some plugs and seeds of native flowering plants, some of which bloom in the spring, and there's some summer and then more in the late summer and early fall. An example of management for an area, this would be bigger than your average residential lot. I'm thinking maybe it's 10,000 square feet, a quarter of an acre. So it's big enough to do plant control, such as a controlled burn before most things get going in the spring, and burn off the dead growth from previous years. There's a roadside ditch there. And there's actually a drop basin for the drainage system on Belle Isle. It keeps it from having standing water throughout the year, but there's a little bit of standing water in the spring and late winter. And it produces sedges, rushes, and a number of grasses that are host plants for skippers and a few other small butterflies. And there's some swamp milkweed there that's doing just fine, and it's great for monarch caterpillars and as a nectar source for the adults. And often see one or two monarchs in the garden when I go out there. Next slide. So here's a picture that after that controlled burn, you see the clumps of sedges and some of the older growth has been burned off. And then a few weeks later, my slide showing spring shows the first flower coming up. This would be in late April. And that is a native flowering prey plant called Golden Alexanders. It's in the carrot family. Next slide. So in summer, you have these things, a lot of plants are growing up. We have some half-grown goldenrods that will bloom in September, maybe towards the end of August. And anybody happy with what that butterfly is on the left? Very similar to a monarch. And notice it has a little black line. Very good. Thank you. Little black line going through the lower wing, and a little bit more raggedy edge on the wing than a monarch, and a single row of white spots. That is the viceroy. And over on the left here in the summertime species is this group of butterflies I was ignoring earlier. And this one is called Peck's skipper. It has a nice mottled pattern to it. It's heavy bodied and it has a club-shaped antenna that's inwardly curved, and can't quite see it in the photo, but the other main true butterflies have a rounded end of their antenna. It's not inwardly curved. Next slide. In fall, I got a late lobelia blooming here. You can see some of the sedges have produced seed and rushes. And there's a good wetland plant there, as well as the more upland goldenrod. So we get quite a variety of things. The goldenrods do attract monarchs when everything else has stopped blooming. And you can see them nectaring at length sometimes on goldenrod. Next slide. I'll talk about my census a little bit and the route. Next slide. So my route began, I took training in March of 2017, a few months before I retired, and did a couple of walks before I retired in June that year. And actually I've been continuing. I didn't update the slide enough, but I did a walk last Thursday, so never mind. I'm trying to do about a dozen of them a year at week-long intervals, try to catch the different butterflies as they come out. So my route is circular, starting at the Belle Isle Nature Center, and especially in the Butterfly Garden. They'll go along Lakeshore Drive or the Outer Drive, down Central Avenue, and then cut through the woods to Oakway Drive and walk back. All along the way, there's various types of wet woods and openings, and with high water on the Great Lakes, there are a whole lot more cattails than there are flowering plants along here these days. So my 0.87 miles, we're instructed to walk at approximately 1 mile an hour and mark down every butterfly you can or even can't identify that comes within 5 meters of you, to right, left, frontwards, backwards, and up. I have to look up once in a while. Next slide. So there's a little report on some of the species I've been able to see. Of those top 25 we discussed, I've seen 18 of them now on these walks, and they get counted and put into the database. And then I have 9 other species. And here again, you could see how I was earlier ignoring the skippers. And let's see, these are kind of in order of when I first saw them. But I had a new species this year, and this is the 9th one now that's not on the top 25 list. This is a little fellow that I thought was similar but slightly different. Can I maybe go to the next slide again, Eva?
Mm-hmm.
This thing is called the common ringlet, and it's kind of a subboreal northern species. I thought it was a little wood satyr, but I saw orange on it. The wood satyr, you might remember, is a pale gray small butterfly. This one was flying low and erratically, and it didn't like my presence, so it dove down in some grass at the side of the road. So this picture on the left is, you can't see me, but your intrepid photographer has his iPhone about 6 inches from the butterfly in the middle of the grass. I'm on my hands and knees. But I did get that distinctive little spot on the forewing and a little bit of orange showing through. And if you can get a look at the butterfly to the right, this is a non-citizen science professional photograph of what the thing's supposed to look like. But it was fun. I have a book called Michigan Butterflies and Skippers. It was put out by the Michigan Extension Service, Michigan State University. And it has official range maps for these butterflies. And the nearest county that this butterfly had been listed in was St. Clair, and nothing in Wayne County. So it was kind of fun to see this one. And it's a new butterfly, not only for me on Belle Isle, but it's the first time I've ever seen such a thing. Okay, next slide. So I want to give an example of what the pollard base might be good for. And I decided to grab a little bit of data that I had over 3 years to get a gauge of how common one of the more likely species is to see out there. And notice that my walk is about an hour long, and it's about a mile long. So if I see one monarch, that's 1 monarch per hour or 1 monarch per mile. What pollard base is definitely counting is they know the length, counting both. They know the length of the walk, and they also know you have to report the amount of time you spent actively looking for butterflies. So there are monarchs around here in May, not usually very large numbers. And Belle Isle, Bink is Belle Isle Nature Center, which is the center of my walk. Thank you. So there are monarchs around, but I don't see them very often in May. They're around in June and July, and they start getting going in good numbers. I had 7 of them last week, my late July count. And then in August, we have butterflies that are hatching from these earlier butterflies. They're actually 2 generations in of the monarch summer in Michigan. So those have hatched and are flying around and producing one last generation that hatches in late August and early September. So there's quite a few monarchs around. Certainly see them along the Detroit River, and some days moving pretty good numbers. They're still around in September, and I've seen a few in October, but they really need to be getting along to Mexico. It's 1,100 miles to the border from here. So the database shows everybody's favorite unit, right? Monarchs per hour. That they're likely to see the most monarchs in a given amount of time and distance in August. And that is definitely the case out here. Next slide. I'll show you the butterfly walk, especially the part through the woods. This had at one time been a paved road connecting Oakway Drive and Central Avenue, but it's been a bike and hiking trail for a long time now. And it might actually get improved by the state of Michigan one of these days as a little more attractive walkway. But right now it's pretty good for getting out into the woods and seeing things. This picture on the right is actually an Audubon field trip that Bailey, you may remember Bailey, or staff that are on the call, and some other youth. Bailey's in there somewhere in the front. I was tagging along the back. Next slide. So in the spring, it's on the left, the same trail, more or less the same spot. Things are greening up, not too many things flowering. And as I go along Central Avenue, you see it's kind of wet. There's some cattails and some struggling green ash. And in the background, you can see some of the suffering oak trees. There's an oak wilt on Belle Isle that is tearing up the various oak populations out there. You can't see it in the picture, but there's a few white-tailed deer hiding behind the trees. Next slide. And in high summer, this is what our path looks like. And on the left, you have really sharp eyes. There's a northern pearly eye on one of those large leaves of the planting the side of the trail. And it's a great day when you see the butterfly before it sees you or gets pissed off at you and flies away and won't sit down again. And on the right, for you caterpillar hunters out here, is a monarch butterfly caterpillar on the typical host plant, the common milkweed. And a little hint for finding a butterfly is small holes in the leaves, and also what is the non-technical term would be butterfly poop. That since this is a concave leaf, it sits there for a while. You see it, Ava?
Mm-hmm.
You see the caterpillar in there. So that the technical term is frass, F-R-A-S-S for some reason, but it's pretty handy for finding caterpillar. Next slide. Okay, we're into fall, and here's a monarch that's all but dozing on Canada goldenrod. And I did find a chrysalis one day. This is attached on the right there, bright green with a little gold trim, is the pupa or chrysalis of the monarch butterfly. It's on a daisy fleabane that is growing a few feet away from some milkweed plants. I believe they typically, caterpillars fall to the ground when it's time to form the pupa, and they crawl up whatever else they find. So they're usually not on the same plant that they were eating as a caterpillar, although they can be. So next slide. So getting out on Belle Isle, in addition to finding butterflies, you see all kinds of crazy things. I found what's now becoming on the left a much less uncommon thing. I used to see these all the time as a kid, but this is sometimes called a garden spider. It's yellow and black, and this is the underside or ventral side, and it's very sharp yellow lines on it, black and white legs, and it makes a perfectly round orb web right in the middle of where you might want to walk. And they often used to show up. I think I've seen one over 20 years in our backyard garden. And another thing with all the little wetlands, we see a lot of frogs and toads. In the center here is might be this year's hatch of a leopard frog. And they once they leave the tadpole stage, they hop through the woods for the rest of the year, and will mate and make more tadpoles in April and May. Also on the right is the aftermath of a thunderstorm. This is the day after a fairly powerful thunderstorm last summer on Belle Isle. A big chunk of one of those dead oak trees fell on my butterfly path. A lot of nerve. So there are things to see out there. The white-tailed deer, coyote, and beaver are all very much present on Belle Isle these days. And there's a huge beaver den along the Nashua Canal, which leads just north of the athletic fields on Belle Isle. They're nesting eagles. They're in their third year. I've been told they've produced 1 young this year, 3 young last year, and 2 young 2 years ago. And next slide. We've been dealing 3 years in a row with near record or breaking records of high water on the Great Lakes. And it happens that 2 years ago, ecological restoration project on Lake Okanoka near the Canadian side of the island was connected directly to the head of the island and basically Lake St. Clair, the beginning of the Detroit River. We're no longer protected by 2 feet of dam to kind of kept water out of the island. The idea was to have natural ups and downs with the changing water levels. It does change habitats by flooding out plants, allowing others to grow for a while, and then when it dries out, the original plants come pushing back. But this is such high water that it's caused the closure. This is Central Avenue, which is the main spine, very heavily traveled road normally on Belle Isle, and this is me picking my way through. The water is full of tadpoles and even small fish, and some conical shaped snails, which I know are typical of Great Lakes waters rather than pond water in Michigan. And for you bird watchers out there, I've seen the strangest things on a paved road. Green and great blue heron. There's now a Virginia rail nesting out there, which is a marshland bird. I've seen killdeer and spotted sandpiper eating the snails. And I guess 3 inches of water is deep enough for a kingfisher. So they're very much out there. So it's quite the bird watching experience. And about where I'm standing, most of the way out to the Lakeshore Drive, north end of the island. In the cattails, which are now even thicker to the right, is a singing marsh wren. It's a cattail specialist. I have an idea that if it's still singing this time of year, it may not be a mated bird, but I had not seen marsh wrens before this year. I've seen them several times this summer now. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm getting towards the end, and I wanted to talk about butterfly host plants and butterfly gardening a little bit. And one of my ambitions is to have the Belle Isle Nature Center or bank open again, so I can plant some more native flowering perennials out there for these guys. And here's a little friend that I couldn't identify, and I sent a picture off to my helper at the Kalamazoo Nature Center. And it turns out that this is not an uncommon butterfly, but it's another one that had never been listed in Wayne County before. It's called a hickory hairstreak. Uses oaks and hickories as the caterpillar host plant. And it loves to sit on flowering common milkweed. It'll sit there long enough, just get your cell phone camera near it. So I got some more butterflies coming too. Next slide, please. I'll talk about resources first. Next slide. For butterfly counting, this is the website that was up before, MichiganButterfly.org. It was run by the Kalamazoo Nature Center, and they have their own website called Michigan Butterfly Network. And, you can sign up there for training and also sign up to learn about butterfly censuses and other activities out in the southwestern part of Michigan. The Pollard Base is a university-hosted and National Science Foundation funded way of counting organisms, and it's gone international now. So it's quite a powerful website. And some things I've thrown in about monarchs. These two websites will get you to about anything you would like to know about monarchs and their migrations and their population. There are a number of studies going on, many of them involving school groups and volunteer groups that are very much citizen science based in tracking monarchs and also attracting them to schoolyards and places around residential neighborhoods. And then there's the North American Butterfly Association that sponsors a different kind of count. As you may realize, I'm looking at butterflies that happen to come by me on a specified place and time. There's also a full-day Butterfly Census that's sponsored by the North American Butterfly Association. They get a number of people in the field, and it's very similar to the birding Christmas bird count. You have a large area and try to count every butterfly you can see. And the unfortunate thing about that is you might see more types of butterflies, but it's only one day of the year. So try mid-July when the best chance of seeing the most species. But there are some things that are spring and fall specialists, or they're fall migrants that you would miss entirely. Next slide. Now about butterfly gardening, some of my good sources are a place out near Lansing called Wild Type Plants. That will, most of their work is more wholesale than retail, but they have a few retail days on weekends in May and also in August. I got out there one time, picked up a couple dozen plants for the Belle Isle Nature Center. A local group on the east side of Detroit is in St. Clair Shores called the St. Clair Shores Yardiners. And they have a sale every June. They managed to pull it off this year despite COVID-19. They actually use plants that are produced by the Wild Types nursery. Another source in Western Michigan is in Portland, Michigan, sort of near Kalamazoo, called the Michigan Wildflower Farm. And they have a catalog that includes native flowering plant seeds. And another one that'll provide plants and seeds is called Native Connections. And there's an association of wildflower growers in Michigan called the Wildflower Association of Michigan. And then I found another site with the Michigan State University Extension called pollinators.msu edu. And I found that pretty helpful. I know of a couple other sources. For you on the northeast side, there's Wiegand's Nursery that has pesticide-free native flowering plants. And on the west side in Garden City, there's a Butterfly Nursery, kind of a side specialty for them called Barson's Nursery. It's Barson's, I believe, .com. And there's a club out in the north suburbs called the Rochester Pollinators. They also have a plant sale. And I've just learned that they sell wildflower seeds on Etsy.com. Next slide. So if you're so moved, you have a site of your own or a group that might get involved, a way to encourage butterfly populations is to give them something to eat, both the caterpillars and the adults. So for flowering plants, you need a lot of sun. Some plants require a full day of sun. Others do better with maybe half sun. There are species that are adapted to woodland edges. They have very showy flowers and will attract butterflies. And try to pick plants that will bloom at different times of the year. So I showed you the golden alexanders. That's one of the first showy plants of the year. There's a white or red plant called penstemon that's good for June and early July. And what's blooming now are vervains, are just getting into ironweed and joe pye weed. And later in the year, goldenrod and asters are very good for butterflies. Told that butterflies are better at finding these plants if they're grown in clumps. So you have 3 to 5 individual plants grown a few feet apart from each other. And if you want a nice look to the garden, have the shorter plants in front and the taller plants to the back. And for overwintering, some species overwinter as pupa or chrysalises in the ground. They wrap themselves up in a leaf or crawl under leaf litter. So you should leave a little bit of stuff on the ground underneath the plants. And although I find this hard to do if I only have one parsley plant in the garden, you have to accept some damage to your plants because the caterpillars have to eat too. And I've been looking at my parsley plants for days now. And just today discovered 2 black swallowtail caterpillars next to the parsley on the dill. So another thing, you have to find a source of plants, either grow them from seed and not use pesticides, or if you get them from a nursery, there still are some large-scale nurseries that sell plants that have systemic pesticides. It's actually part of the plant and throughout the plant in leaves and stems and flowers. So it's possible to get a nice fresh monarch caterpillar, put it on a milkweed, and have it start eating and actually die from the plant you gave it to eat. It's very important to have a non-pesticide source of plants for butterfly gardening. All right, next slide. A few more butterflies to just cruise through here. The one on the left is a Great Lakes marsh specialist called the bronze copper. I got one look at it, and before I could get the camera focused, it flew away. It's similar to that American copper I was talking about earlier. It's a little grayer on the inside and has a nice orange stripe at the base of the hind tail. In the center is that pearl crescent. It's a small size fritillary, maybe 1.5 inches across. And my woodland skulker over here in the upper right has lots of little spots on it. And a little bit of white striping is called a northern pearlii. Next slide. And the one on the right is okay, you can quiz yourselves now. It's showing blue in the wing, not a whole lot of yellow, but a double row of yellow spots. And we've got a female black swallowtail there. Somebody is on it. Now, the one on the left, this is too weird to even have a quiz for this one. But the only reason I knew what this was, and this is in my backyard, on what we call Michaelmas daisy, or it's very similar to the New England aster. This is actually a European species, and there's only been 5 or 6 records in the United States that I could find. Why it was in Detroit, Michigan in August a couple years ago, I don't know. But it's very showy butterfly, quite closely related to the painted lady and American lady. Both of the lady butterflies are capable of crossing stretches of ocean. I know they go from Spain to England, for instance. I don't know about crossing the entire Atlantic. So this thing's called a European peacock. It's actually a pretty common butterfly in England and France. A total mystery to me. Next slide. One of the blue butterflies is called a spring azure on the left. And this is the Appalachian brown on the right, and something ate half of its lower wing. I've only seen one of those in my 3.5 years out on Belle Isle. Next slide. Here's one that I first saw 2 years ago, and it shows up towards the end of September. Apparently it's a very strong flying little, not the smallest of skippers, but just fairly small butterfly. The male at least has some pretty distinctive spotting on the outer wing. And they apparently fly from many states away and show up here. I don't know what happens to them afterwards. But it's called the fiery skipper. And if I could get the wings all the way open, it's pretty orange on the inside. And next slide. So I'm going to wrap it up here, and we'll stick around for questions if you can still hanging in with me. And thanks very much for coming out. And this is your intrepid, not so skilled video photographer sneaking up on a red-spotted purple that was minding its own business, seeping up water and minerals from wet soil on Belle Isle. So all gone. That's all I've got today. Hope I didn't take too much time.
No, that was great. I have a couple questions from the chat. First question, is the leopard frog a native species?
Yes, it is. As we call them, the northern leopard frog. It's very common and larger frog in the southern United States. This frog will go up through our northern tier states up into southern Canada.
Okay, and our next question is actually an ID. Somebody sent a picture in the chat. Tom, if you're able to kind of scroll up, and I think you should be able to click download and see the picture, and maybe you can help identify this butterfly.
Okay, was there a time? Let's see, how do you?
Yes, it was sent at 12:49.
Okay, oh, here's the school. Okay. Excuse my extremely low level of Zoom skill here. I found it. We got somebody on the chat, at least originally it was calling in from Naples, Florida. A lovely place. Didn't have so much COVID. All right, I tried clicking on this thing. Wallaby. Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of these on Belle Isle. They fly from late June kind of into early July. And it's very similar to that hickory hair streak I showed you. But this one is called the banded hair streak. And Ava, if you could run down those brown spots on the forewing. Oh, you can't see, you don't have it up.
No.
Never mind. But this is very much a banded hair streak. And there's quite a few of them out on Belle Isle, but they're only flying for a 3 to 4 week period and have one brood. So around the 4th of July and a little bit earlier is the best time to see that. So let me close out my picture. Now I'm lost.
And then the last, oh yeah.
Yeah, I have lost the chat here. Let's see, chat. Okay.
So our last question is, what are some of your favorite plants for attracting butterflies that you planted?
Well, some of them aren't actually native. And in the backyard, marigolds, surprisingly enough, which are kind of hard to kill, and they're not any more expensive than anything else is these days. But they do attract black swallowtails and pearl crescents and a couple of other things. And they're extremely easy to grow, low to the ground, and they'll bloom most of the summer. Another one, because it attracts monarchs and also giant swallowtail that I showed earlier, is the zinnia. And apparently you need to get the original Mexican variety that grows 2.5 feet tall. I forget what they call them now, but it's not the cut and come again or miniature zinnia. They're great big ones that grow about 3 inches across. And they will attract butterflies through July through September. For late in the season, the aster is very good. You get ladies, occasionally a monarch, and a couple other things that we get on there. For monarchs, it's good to have both the common milkweed and the swamp milkweed. And the swamp milkweed can be grown in a garden. It normally shows up in a squishy area that has a few inches of standing water in the spring and then dries out in the summer. Common milkweed blooms a couple weeks before the swamp milkweed, and the swamp milkweed lasts a little longer. So between the two species, you can get a month and a half of attracting monarchs for the nectar, and also a chance for them to lay eggs, and you can grow your own caterpillars. One thing about the common milkweed, though, is that it's an extremely aggressive plant, and I recommend that you plant it in large pots so that the roots don't establish themselves. They'll grow 2 or 3 feet down in the ground, and once you have common milkweed, you're going to have it for many years in the future, and more of them. It's a pretty aggressive plant, and it's surprisingly enough not a native plant, but the swamp milkweed is, and it's a little better behaved. And actually it's a flower that lasts longer.
Great. That's all of our questions for today.
Okay.
So thank you, Tom, and thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We will send a follow-up email with this presentation recorded, and hopefully put together some of the resources that Tom shared.
Okay, I know I had at least one experienced butterfly watcher on the chat.
Yes, for sure. Okay, thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.